Welcome back. I'm Matt, and once again you're watching Replay Retro, where just a few weeks ago we tried to review the Super Nintendo Scope and the Sega Menacer. However, those of you who saw that episode will know that the Menacer wasn't exactly cooperative. So to make up for that, we're bringing you another slice of light gun action with an all-time classic from both the arcades and home consoles in the somewhat controversial shape of the Konami Justifier. First seen in 1992 as part of the arcade game Lethal Enforcers, the Justifier was criticised for its realistic shape, having been designed around the Colt Python revolver. The game Lethal Enforcers was also seen as being very realistic because it used full motion video rather than computer-generated graphics, meaning that the people you were shooting at were real in the truest sense of the word. Around this time, the United States Congress was once again looking at the effects of violent video games on people that played them, and cited the Justifier and Lethal Enforcers specifically as worrying examples of realistic violence in gaming. As far as they were concerned, this game couldn't hide behind the usual defence of games, whereby a producer simply stated that, well, these characters, they're not human, and the gun, it's a control pad. In this case, the characters were clearly live actors, and the gun itself felt very real. So for the first time, the anti-video games lobby was gaining real strength. Strength which still rears its head today, attacking games like Manhunt and Grand Theft Auto, even resulting in some games, like Manhunt 2, being banned from sale until changes were made to censor some of its more extreme moments of violence. Fortunately for us, Konami's Lethal Enforcers survived this trial by fire and became an arcade hit, inspiring future arcade successes like Virtual Cop and Time Crisis. In 1993, Lethal Enforcers was ported to the home systems, with a brilliant version finding its way onto the Mega CD system. The system's FMV capabilities set it apart from the Super Nintendo and TurboGrafx of the time, making it the perfect console for this game. And what controller did Konami choose to pack in with it? That's right. As a slap in the face to the protesters, the Justifier light gun was packed in with the game. And it's that package that we're going to take a look at now. Okay, so here we are with the Lethal Enforcers box and some cool retro detective movie era artwork there. And some screenshots on the back. Inside the box you of course find the Justifier light gun, an instruction manual for the game, and of course showing how to set up the light gun. And obviously the disc to play Lethal Enforcers on your Mega CD system with the Justifier light gun. So let's take a look at the actual light gun. As you can see, it is pretty much identical to the arcade light gun. There's screws down on this side obviously to hold the two cases together, and on the other side there are no screws. It's easy to see why people were concerned about how much this looks like the actual Colt Python handgun. There's no mistaking what this object is, apart from the colour. The build quality itself, it feels really tough. I've held light guns before on other systems, including the Xbox, where they just felt tacky and badly built, but this does feel quite tough. And I imagine that explains why this one is still working perfectly so long after its release. Here then we have the trigger, which has a nice solid action to it with a good click, so that you know it's definitely worked. The Justifier and Konami logos there on it. Just up from the trigger we have the start button here for obviously selecting and starting in the game. At the front, this is obviously how the gun reads what's going on the TV, using white flashes, as so many light guns have done over time. On the base here, you'll notice this little telephone style socket here, which is for attaching the Player 2 gun. So, like with a few systems we've looked at before, this is a daisy-chained system. So your Player 2 gun would be plugged into there, and then obviously Player 2 has their pistol next to you. The advantage of this is that obviously the two of you are going to be standing quite close anyway, so the cable is extended almost by having that for the second player. It's a genius way of doing it, and it means that you can still have a control pad in socket 1 on your console to make it easier for you to select options in game. Really clever little idea by Konami there. and not one that I think has been repeated on other systems. I think most other things just you use the player 1 and player 2 socket. The other thing of note here is of course the controller cord. When we looked at the Super Nintendo Scope and the Sega Mega Drive Menacer a little while back, they were of course wireless, communicating with a small box on top of the television, whereas this, as you can see, has a cable which plugs into the player 2 socket on the Mega Drive console. However, there is plenty of cable, as you can see here, to get a decent distance from the screen, so you don't feel like you're hunched up really close over the screen, and so to me it really isn't an issue. And considering that this is far more accurate in my opinion than either the Menacer or the Scope, I would much rather have this cable than have those inferior systems. So let's take a quick look now at the gameplay for Lethal Enforcers. Okay, so here we are with Lethal Enforcers. Let's start. Tell it that we're just using the gun. So here we are. People that regularly play shooters will recognise the formula here. Just picked up a gun off the floor that was dropped by someone and lost it immediately. But you see, you've got people that you shouldn't kill, like that, and people that you should kill. And obviously to reload, shoot off the screen, as you would expect. The Justifier is very, very accurate for its iron sights. There we go, just picked up a Magnum. Managed to not lose it, which I'm quite pleased with. See obviously that, as we mentioned before, the game does use real actors in the same kind of way that Mortal Kombat and games like that did, which, as we've already said, is part of the main reason that people were worried about the violence in this game and how it would affect people. Start to continue. But obviously, by today's standards, even with these real actors, it's not a very realistic game. So we move on to an outdoors section here, more innocent bystanders running away. That was actually a cop. I just couldn't tell. Obviously a number of features in this game do reappear in later shooters, so your ability to pick weapons up off the floor, for example, is a feature that's common in shooters now. I don't think though that there's any kind of detection for where you hit the person like there is in future games, and obviously the background cannot be shot. You can't do damage to the background, which obviously games like Virtual Cop in the future would change. Reloaded too late there. And of course we have the obligatory shootout in cars stage. There we go. You can of course shoot the tyres, like I've done there, but it doesn't really do anything. Just gives you something to shoot at. Obviously that's a feature that again recurred in later games, such as Virtua Cop, whereby shooting the tyres of a car could eventually lead that car to flip, and so you kill all the occupants without actually having to shoot them. So yeah, there we go. That is Lethal Enforcers on the Mega CD with the Konami Justifier. Well, it's clear that by today's standards, the graphics of Lethal Enforcers aren't really up to much, but for its time, it was really realistic, and you can begin to understand why people got concerned about the effect it could have on those people playing it. But to modern gamers, Lethal Enforcers will appear very tame, especially when compared to today's much bloodier arcade shooters, including Warzade and House of the Dead. Also, when compared with games like Grand Theft Auto, which give the player a variety of ways to deal death and see the results, I imagine most games protesters would much rather go back to these more innocent times of games like Lethal Enforcers. Lethal Enforcers is a relatively simple shooter, but it is genuinely addictive and a must-have for any collector. But you have to have that Justifier light gun to really bring the arcade experience home. Using any other light gun with this game just wouldn't feel right. There's loads more great light guns out there, and in time we'll certainly be featuring more of them on the show, along with more retro console, accessories and games reviews. So don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also follow Replay Retro on Twitter for news about the show. And of course, I'll be back next week with more retro gaming. See you then. Still not heard anything back about that warranty card. I might give them a ring.